Hello and good morning to everyone listening. Thank you for joining me for this installment of Solutions for Rural Development webinar series. As a note, this is a re-recording of Charmaine Chittister's webinar on how to avoid burnout while helping others succeed. This is me, your host, Maya Ozzie. And so today we're going to be tuning in to Charmaine, as I mentioned, who will be giving us some actionable tips on how to keep being an engaged and functioning human without burning yourself out on all of the things you do within your personal and work life. For first-time listeners, I want to let you know that this webinar series is brought to you for free by the Arizona Rural Development Council and Local First Arizona Foundation. These monthly webinars are based around rotating topics that address various issues and solutions surrounding the development process, specifically to rural areas. Now, to tell you a little bit about our presenter, Charmaine grew up in a small farming town in Illinois, then moved out west and earned her bachelor's of business management from Southern Utah University. She's worked for the last 7 years at the Eastern Arizona College Small Business Development Center and as a counselor assisting startup and established businesses with customer with her husband, 4 kids, dog, and 2 crazy cats. Charmaine has volunteered several years as a charter school board member, T-ball coach, soccer coach, Cub Scout leader, and committee member for various community groups. Her hobbies include making lists, trying to remember what day it is, and eating chocolate in a dark pantry while hiding from children. Sounds like she knows what burnout is. So looking forward to learning how she manages all those things. Um, for everyone listening, please hang tight while we start the screen sharing initiation. It takes a moment.
Okay, thank you, Maya. So this is now Charmaine Chittister. Thank you for that introduction. And I certainly don't want to make it sound like I actually know how to do everything. I am just an employee and a mom and a wife and an employee, or excuse me, a community volunteer person who tries to keep her head on straight. And some of the things I'm going to share with you are things I've just picked up through various sources over the last few years that have really helped me keep a perspective on how to avoid burnout and to be the best person that I can be. So, like Maya said, I am employed by one of our Arizona Small Business Development Centers. We're located at the Eastern Arizona College Center. If you look on this map here, we're down there at number 9 in the southeast corner of the state. And we also cover a couple of counties surrounding us. And we provide no-cost business solutions to those looking to launch, grow, or sustain their business. And we're partially funded by a grant through the U.S. Small Business Administration and then whatever host institution we reside at. So we're all over the state, as you can see. We also have offices that help with government contracting. That's called our PTACT office. That stands for Procurement Technical Assistance Center. And that's also a free service that we have available to anybody looking to contract with the government, which is required a lot of different certifications. So we are here for you if you have a small business or looking at starting a small business. I'll give you a website at the end. You can look up your nearest location. So we appreciate you taking the time to watch this re-recording. Because this is not live, you won't be able to engage with the questions, but at the end I will give you my contact information. So if you have anything you would like to follow up on, please feel free to do so. So when we talk about commitments, I think a lot of times we wear the busy badge, right? We run into somebody and we say, "Hey, how are you?" And they go, "Oh, I'm just so busy. I'm just so overwhelmed." And I don't know anybody who is not busy. But if we really stop and think about all of our commitments in between committees, volunteer work, all of the things that we have just in our family and our friends. We have so many things going on. It's really overwhelming. I love my full life, but it's definitely hard at times. Just a small glimpse of my life. I'm a mother of 4 kids and married, and I have a lot of motherly duties. And then I'm also an employee at Eastern Arizona College in the Small Business Development Center. So we have all of the things that take us into our work life. I have coached soccer for several years in addition to running all my kids to their practices and their games. And then there's t-ball for several years. And then there's piano lessons, because you've got to have your kids, make sure that they're developing all of those possible skills in case they're a budding Mozart. And then the recitals, the practices, everything that comes with piano lessons. And then there's the birthday parties and the holiday parties, right? I know you've all been there. And then I've also been involved with Scouts for about 8 or 9 years, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of work and planning. So then there's just the everyday things, the maintenance of life, like when your youngest decides that his sister's facial mud mask makes him looks like a superhero, and he leaves a mess behind that you have to try to get cleaned up, right? I'm sure many of you can relate to at least 1 or 2 of those things. And if you've taken the time to watch this webinar, there's a chance that you're also feeling the pinch of life. So if I asked you what your most valuable resource is, I bet you would say time. I think when we're young, a lot of us have money as that also valuable resource, but as you get older and a little bit more financially stable, you start to realize it's really time. And most of the time we hear the phrase that money cannot buy happiness. And while I certainly will not argue with that fact when it comes to love and relationships, when it comes to actually spending your money, there are some things that have shown that if you spend your money in a certain way, you can decrease the stress of life. There was an article just this past summer put out by the Associated Press, and it was called, "Yes, You Can Buy Happiness If You Spend It to Save Time." And what happened is researchers surveyed more than 6,000 people in 4 countries, and they also ran an experiment, and they gave people $40 for 2 weeks. So the first week they gave them $40, and they asked them to buy something material, such as a shirt or maybe some shoes. And the next week they paid themselves to save time. So they gave them the $40 the second week, and they had them do maybe provide some money to somebody who could come in and do their lawn care service, or clean their house, or prepare something for them that they would do otherwise. And what they found out is that the people that spent money to save time were significantly happier. So I really thought that this was an interesting point as I contemplated the value of my personal time. And I like the saying here that time is more valuable than money. You can get more money, but you cannot get more time. So what I'm hoping to show you throughout this seminar is that there are tricks that you can use to feel like you can get more time, though. And when we did this live, we did a poll, and I asked everybody, if you had to select a category in which you feel you need more time, or you need to manage your time within that category, which would it be? And the options were work, family, personal health, or all of the above. So all of the above got the majority of the votes, but the second one was actually personal health. I think a lot of us, when it comes to giving ourselves the privilege of making sure that we take care of ourselves, it really falls down to the bottom of the list. And so what I love about this webinar is whether you're finding the need to manage your work time better, or get in shape and eat healthier, or find more time for your family and friends, or spiritual health, you really can apply this information to any of those. So just sit back and enjoy this little ride as we go through some of the things I've learned over the last couple of years. Now, if you've ever watched any other seminar involving time management, you might have seen this example. So in this example, you take a glass jar and you have a certain amount of sand, small rocks, and big rocks. And of course, this is a metaphor for our lives. If you put the small sand particles in first, such as the small things that you would have done in life, and then you put the a little bit more important rocks, the medium-sized rocks in there, and then you put the big rocks in, they don't fit, right? We just don't have time. And what gets left over are the big rocks or our priorities in life. And so when you dump everything out and do it again, this time you put the priorities in first, and then the medium-sized rocks, and then the sand, and everything fits. And of course, the lesson here is that if you focus on your priorities, everything will work out. Now, I think this is a great metaphor, and it does hold true a lot of the time. But most of the time for me, the problem is that things pop up, such as all of those little things. I know sometimes I sit down when I make my to-do list, and I think, well, these things, though they're not important, they just take a couple minutes. So let's do these 10 things first, so I can really clear my day and focus on the big priorities. And then what happens is it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, all those little things just kept piling up, and then you don't end up getting your big priority for the day done. Another thing that can happen is those priorities can change, right? You get a call that your kid is sick at school, or maybe all of a sudden that deadline for that report moved up. And so what I find is this idea of the sand and the medium rocks and the big rocks is great conceptually, but when you apply it in life, it just doesn't work sometimes. And so that's what we're going to focus on today, is digging a little bit deeper and how we can mentally overcome the managing of our priorities throughout the day. So I don't think the real problem with time management is necessarily the order of our rocks. I think it's really understanding what our big rocks are. We say that our big rocks are our family or our health, but then we don't really have that on our to-do list when we sit down every day. The other thing that I think about is not feeling guilty about your rocks. So that might be a confusing statement. What do you mean by that, not feeling guilty about your rocks? Well, what I mean is that if we do put priorities down, we have to really be able to defend them sometimes, or even not have personal bias against other people. Here's an example. So when years ago, when my husband decided to go get his PhD, we moved across the country to Connecticut. And he went to the University of Connecticut, and he was a very, very busy graduate student. We already had a couple of kids, and he sat at a desk about 14 hours a day if he wasn't teaching. So he told us one night that he was going to start working out during dinner time, because that was the only time during the day he could find to exercise. Now, I was really upset about it. I kind of thought, well, I certainly don't have time to exercise. I was working and taking care of the house and the kids, and I was a little jealous that he was going to make time to exercise, but I also was upset that he didn't feel sitting down with us during that busy time of our life was that important. And another example was when we moved out to Arizona. I met a wonderful woman who has 8 kids, and I found out that she played this on the Women's City Volleyball League. And I thought, how in the world can you do that? Again, I thought, I certainly don't have time to play city volleyball, even though I love to do it. I thought, how can she get away from home when she has 8 kids? I'm sure there's homework to be help with and everything like that. So I found it really interesting that I felt like I should almost make these people feel guilty for their priorities. And so we're going to address that as we move forward. And then the last thing is dealing with the dust storm of the anticipated, unanticipated daily whirlwind. So what I mean by that is that you have so many things that come up, and yet we know these things are going to come up. So even though they're not on our to-do list, we need to be able to manage the fact that we know the day isn't going to go exactly as we planned. And that's the idea of all of that sand piling up on us. So my goals today are pretty simple. I want to teach you something new about time management priorities. So this might not be a brand new concept. Maybe it's going to be reassurance of something that you've kind of thought with some psychology behind it, or maybe you're going to find a new technique that you can use and implement in your life. I want to encourage you to take 30 minutes in the next week to decide how to implement this information, and then recognize how knowing this can help you assist others or even change your personal bias, like I did with my husband's exercising or my friend's volleyball. And then I want you to use at least one new idea from today to make yourself happier. Now, there is a handout that goes with this webinar, and if you have not received it yet from being registered, you can email me. My email address is at the end of the webinar, and I will send it to you. And that can also help you with these goals of taking some time to evaluate how you spend your time. Now, the way that we're going to accomplish this is we're going to talk about different personalities. And we're going to talk about how these personalities fit in an organization and why some succeed and others fail. And then how this information can change the way that you manage your time and why it can make you a better parent, a better employee, a better volunteer. And I realize that that might sound a little funny that we're going to talk about personalities. What's that have to do with it? But if you just stick with me, I'm sure you're going to understand why our personalities definitely influence how we overschedule ourselves. And if you're watching this webinar, there's a good chance that you're doing that and you're trying to find a way to prevent that in the future or to manage it better. So let's talk about different personalities. So I imagine some of you have probably taken at least one personality test. And I have taken several, including all of these, and also the Myers-Briggs personality test. And I have found that they have some useful information, but I don't think any of them really changed how I managed my priorities. I find that the personality tests are a little bit more like a magic trick. They say, come and answer these questions and we'll tell you what you like and what you don't like. We'll tell you your strengths and your weaknesses and what you like and what you don't like about others. So you take the quiz and behold, it's accurate. It told me that I was outgoing and I liked organizational structure. It told me that I liked acts of service and gifts. But to me, that really wasn't insightful. I pretty much knew that. So I think that we try to implement these things in our workplace because we know that there's value in understanding ourselves and understanding others, but I'm not sure that we actually do a good job with it. I'll give you an example here with this Delbert cartoon about personality tests. Take a second to read that. Pretty funny, huh? So this is an example of how it really does feel like sometimes in the workplace we do not implement the information that we have been given in personality tests. So I think that that's pretty fun. Yes, I think it would be good to make these full screen if we can, Maya. I can't do anything else on my end. It must be something on the other end, right? Okay, I'll read this to you just in case you couldn't see it. It says, from now on, all teams will be formed on the basis of Myers-Briggs personality types. If you do not have a personality, one will be assigned to you by our human resources. We need a quiet, dumb guy to pair with an extroverted thinker, is what this says. So it's pretty funny. So up until I read this book, the personality tests just were not applicable for me. So a couple years ago, though, I was given this book as a gift. It's called Give and Take by Adam Grant, Why Helping Others Drives Our Success. And it's a really amazing book. If you like what I have to share with you, I would recommend that you go ahead and buy this book and you read in depth the things that we're going to talk about and skim over today. Now, Adam Grant is an organizational psychologist and a professor at Wharton University in Pennsylvania. Now, you can go and take his personality test for free on adamgrant.net if you're interested. But what I love about what he says in this book is it's so simple that you can really implement it in your life just by a self-evaluation. So he divides people up into 3 different groups: takers, givers, and matchers. So you can probably imagine a taker would be somebody who's more out for themselves and not worried about others. A giver is somebody who wants to help others and maybe not so concerned about themselves. And then matchers are people who will give and take according to who they're paired with. So they watch out for takers and they'll pull back away. And when they're paired with a giver, they're going to allow that trust and break down that wall and be able to help them just like a giver would help anybody else. So I think that it's important to note too that just like any personality test, nobody's going to be 100% a taker or 100% a giver. We're going to be a mixture of all of these. But studies have shown that there is usually a dominant side in the workplace. So you can probably think about which personality you would fit into. And one of the ways that we do that is through this quiz. I'll just give you an example of a question that is on the quiz so you can kind of get an idea. It says it's 1 p.m. and you're headed to the airport for a business trip out of the country. You receive 3 requests from people who are looking for your feedback on a presentation, and you only have time to grant 1. The first request is from your boss's boss, who is seeking your immediate input on a slide deck that he'll be presenting next week. The second request is from a coworker who gave you insightful comments on a major presentation last week. The coworker is a gifted speaker, and he has asked for your assistance in fine-tuning some of the language on his slides for the presentation tomorrow. The third request is from a junior colleague who is nervous about giving his first presentation at the company this afternoon and is hoping for your feedback. Who would you most likely help? So if you took this quiz, if you selected your boss's boss, that would be more of a taker's answer to the question, and we'll discuss why exactly here in just a little bit. If you said that you would help your coworker, that would be a matcher's answer. And if you said that you would help the junior colleague, that would be a giver's answer. So that's kind of how the personality test works. So you're welcome to go take it if you'd like. But what we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit deeper about each of these categories so you can understand why these different personalities impact our workplaces and our personal lives. So a taker is somebody like this man. Now, I don't know if you recognize him immediately. We're going to talk about him more in just a second. But he is, to the extreme, a taker. And as we talk about takers, you probably can identify somebody that you know that would fit this category. Takers aren't necessarily cruel, but they kind of have this attitude of making themselves look big and important, and they're worried about what people think about them, but only certain people, not necessarily everybody. So one example of a taker is this gentleman. Now, if I pop this up here, maybe you're starting to recollect who this is. This is Kenneth Lay. Kenneth Lay took Enron from being the nation's 7th largest company to a bankrupt shell virtually overnight. He stole millions of dollars from workers and was convicted and later died on a beach vacationing from a heart attack just 2 months before his sentencing. Now, what you might not know are some of the things that Adam Grant shares in his book about Kenneth Lay. So he started his life in poverty in Missouri without indoor plumbing, and he worked long hours when he was on a farm, and he also helped his family financially through paper routes, and he put himself through college. He served in the Navy and had other public service jobs. He built his own company worth $110 billion, and it was named for 5 consecutive years by Forbes as America's most innovative company. It was one of the top 25 places to work, and he set up a charitable foundation. He's given several $1 million over the years, and he told everyone that the key to his success was respect, absolute integrity, and living by the golden rule. So it really sounds like he started his life as a giver. He was involved in these public service jobs. He served our country. He was helping his family. But here's the thing. Takers are often fakers. They're posers. They look good on the outside because they want to impress you just in case you can provide them with something down the road. And this is what I was referring to earlier. Supervisors don't often recognize takers because they see the positive side. They see the kissing up, right? But the people under them necessarily don't always identify them, but they're the ones that if a taker is present, that's who's going to get treated poorly, is the people that are under them, on the organizational chart. So let me give you an example. In 1998, when Wall Street analysts visited Enron, Lay recruited 70 employees to pretend to be busy traders. He was hoping to wow the analysts with the image of a productive energy trading business. He had them bring personal photos to a different floor so it looked like they actually worked on the trading floor. And they made imaginary phone calls, creating a ruse that they were busy buying and selling energy and gas. These employees knew that they were being asked to create a false facade, but Ken Lay didn't care about what those employees thought of him. He only cared about what the Wall Street analysts thought of them. And here's a quote by Samuel Johnson. "The true measure of a man is how he treats someone who can do him absolutely no good." This is a clear way to identify a taker. And the thing with takers is they may rise quickly, but they usually fall eventually. How quickly depends on those around them and how tuned in they are with what's really going on and their willingness to call that person out for who they are. So now we're going to move over to takers and talk about what a taker is. Again, this is a taker to an extreme. I'm not sure if you recognize his picture, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about him in just a second. So givers want to help others, and they really don't expect anything in return. So this is a person who is turning in the wallet, the person who's always helping other people at your office in training, and they really add a lot to the corporate world and definitely to our community, right? So this gentleman, his name is John Huntsman Sr. Both of these pictures are of him, and he started off kind of similar to Ken Lay. He served his family growing up, served in the Navy. He actually served a mission for his church. And when he returned, one of his very first jobs was at an egg producer. And in that job, he found the packaging was flawed, and he designed one of the first plastic egg containers. From there, he started his own company dealing with chemicals, plastic, and design. The Big Mac container, that was one of his first successful products. He became a billionaire and a philanthropist, and he has given over $1.5 billion to charities. He also established the Huntsman Institute of Cancer at the University of Utah, as you see up there on the right hand of your screen. But here's the difference. Even though when we talk about John Huntsman Sr. and we talk about Ken Lay, we can look at their backgrounds as being very similar, but this is where you see the difference in the two. The way that John Huntsman Sr. treats people or treated people is much different. Now, you might have heard about him in the news recently, because just this past February, he passed away. So he's no longer here. But his legacy of everything that he did is so amazing. I'll give you an example. Huntsman was once in the middle of negotiations for an acquisition with Charles Smith. He was the CEO of a chemical company. During the negotiations, Smith's wife died. Huntsman decided not to push any further, though, on the last 20% of the deal, which could have brought him another $200 million. He said it would have come at the expense of Charles' emotional state. The agreement stood as it was, he said. It was good enough. Another example is 4 years earlier, he made a verbal agreement with a CEO named Emerson Campton. Huntsman was going to sell 40% of a division of his company to Campton for $54 million. But due to legal delays, it took 6 months for the contract to be written, by which time the profits of the company had skyrocketed, and the same 40% of the company was now worth $152 million, so almost $100 million more. Campton called with a matcher's offer to split the difference, but Huntsman said no, even though the lawyers hadn't drafted the agreement and nothing had been signed. He said that the handshake 6 months ago on that verbal agreement was something that he didn't intend to change. Interesting, huh? So, like I said, John just passed away, and there were so many amazing stories about his life, and most of them, although, boil down to his genuine love to help other people. Now, it's easy to say, oh, if I had that kind of money, I would be generous too, but I think we have that backwards, and we're going to talk about that more in just a minute. So, now we're going to move on to matchers. Matchers, it's kind of hard to find a real good example about matchers, because matchers are the majority of people, and they bend and flow with the givers and the takers. They have this idea of you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, right? So matchers are great as long as they're paired with the right group of people. The only example I could think of when I thought of matchers were the characters from Seinfeld. So you can imagine Seinfeld, if you ever watched that show. If Kramer came and said, Jerry, I need to borrow your car, Jerry would say, that's great, but hey, pick up my dry cleaning on your way home, right? So that's an idea of a matcher. I think pretty much all of the Seinfeld characters were matchers, except for Newman. I don't think that Newman was a matcher. He was definitely a taker. So now we're going to talk about how these different personalities fit into an organization. So while we all love givers, there's also a downside to givers. And that is where we see the burnout, right? So we all know that givers often put their needs before others' needs, before their own. They are driven to help others, and they're motivated by knowing that they'll make a difference, even if it's to their own detriment. But in this process, they do build networks. They collaborate, they communicate, they mentor, they influence others. We love to have them as part of our organizational culture. But when they give too much, they burn out. Some of that example is sometimes they get taken advantage of by other people. They miss getting credit for work that they've done, and they get overlooked for promotions, and sometimes they get lost in the trample of takers. So Adam Grant's book addressed a couple of different studies that they did. One of them was with 160 professional engineers in California, and what they did is they went in and had the engineers rate each other on help given and help received. Now, the least productive engineers were those who gave more than they received. Going out of their way to help others prevented them from getting their own work done. So while they were liked and benefited the company as a whole by lifting others up, they had the lowest score for completed tasks, accomplished deadlines, and managed budgets. The same pattern emerged in medical school. More than 600 medical students in Belgium were evaluated, and the students with the lowest grade had unusually high scores on the giver test. And the same went for salesmen, where the bottom givers brought in 2.5 times less sales annual revenue. Across occupations, it appears that givers are just too friendly, trusting, willing to sacrifice their own interest for the benefit of others. So when compared to takers, givers earned 14% less, had twice the risk of becoming victims of crime, and are judged as 22% less powerful and dominant. So now let's talk about the corporate ladder, or you can translate this into your community, even your family. When we talk about who will be at the bottom, I think you probably all can understand why. Who is at the bottom? The givers, right? Because they get taken advantage of. They just give too much, so they're not taking care of themselves. So now let's think about the top. When we look at doing these personality tests within the corporate world, and they looked at who was at the top of the corporate world, guess who it is? This is where the surprise comes in. Most people say takers, and I would have guessed that too if I hadn't read this book. And sometimes we do see takers at the top, but remember I said takers usually fall at some point. So who we usually see at the top are givers. And then in the middle, we have the takers and the matchers. Now, I know what you're thinking. This doesn't make sense. You said givers were at the bottom, but they're also at the top. When looking at those engineering employees, the people who had the highest level of productivity also tested in as givers. The Belgian medical students with the highest grades, they also tested in as givers. And in sales, top performers were given an average of 50% more annual revenue than takers and matchers. So how can this be, right? How can givers be both at the top and the bottom? That's the difference that is so important. And it's obviously something that makes you realize that there must be two types of givers, right? So you can test in as a giver, but they're acting differently. And that's what we're going to talk here about now. So why some succeed and others fail? So what distinguishes one type of giver from another? That's the question, because it's obviously very important if it makes it a difference from the top and the bottom of the ladder, right? So what do you think distinguishes one type of giver from the other? The answer is sustainability. So anybody can give for a short amount of time, right? But it's the ability to continue to give that makes the difference between givers who burn out and fall to the bottom of the ladder and givers who succeed and go to the top. So this is a study that's in the book about the Caring Canadian Award, and this helps us understand sustainability. So what they did is the recipients of the Caring Canadian Award, they're very prestigious because this is the country's highest award for giving. And these people, in order to qualify to even be nominated for the award, they have sustained levels of giving for sometimes decades in order to get this recognition. So what the study did is it took 25 winners from the Caring Canadian Award and then found 25 other people who also tested in as givers and matched the winners in gender, age, education, but the other group did not sustain the same level of giving. And this is what they found. There were two main motivators with both groups. Those motivators were concern for self-interests and concern for others' interests. So which group scored higher on concern for others' interests? You can probably guess it was the caring Canadians. They mentioned giving and helping 3 times more and related goals like serve as a positive role model to young people, more so than the additional 25 who had not received the award. But here's the surprise. The Caring Canadian winners also scored higher on the self-interest questions. They mentioned a quest for power and achievement almost twice as often and had 20% more objectives related to gaining influence, earning recognition, and attaining individual excellence. Successful givers, it turns out, are just as ambitious as takers and matchers. So this, for me, is really where my mental worlds collided, because I didn't understand how you could have the same level of interest in yourself and the same level of interest in others. I felt like they were at the opposite end of one continuum, yet these studies show that they are completely independent motivators. You can have them at the same time. So we have to stop thinking about our passion and our interest as being like a pie, right? The more we take out and give to others, it doesn't leave us with less pie. And that takes a little bit of an acceptance, but I think as we go through the rest of this webinar, you're going to understand why that is. Now, we're not talking necessarily about the results of time and money and to-do lists just yet. We're just talking about interest, where your passion lies, what drives you, what motivates you, and successful givers sustain their giving by being just as passionate in themselves as they are in others. I know some of you are probably already thinking the word selfish in your head, but let's take a look at this on another visual example. So if you have low interest in yourself and low interest in others, you're pretty much apathetic, right? But what if you have high interest in others and low interest in yourself? That's where we see the selfless giver or the self-sacrificing giver. So that's this idea of the bottom of the ladder where people burn out, right? Now, if you have low interest for others and a high interest for yourself, then you're a taker, you're selfish. But the real key is that bottom right one, otherish. That's the term that Adam Grant gives the type of givers we're going to talk about, is the otherish givers, or the successful givers that are able to rise to the top. That's where we see a high concern for others' interest and a high concern for self-interest. Now, I personally felt like this was a light bulb moment for me. Again, I just always felt that interest for myself and others were finite resources and that one drained the other. There just isn't enough drive to sustain both of them at 100%. But as I thought about this as a parent, it made sense to me. So as I mentioned earlier, I have 4 kids. Now this is number 3. His name is William. Now he's older than this now, but I tell you, he still has those dimples. And if there was a child that could somehow steal my love for any of my other children, that fuzzy hair and those dimples could do it. But you know what? That didn't happen. Anybody that has more than one child will tell you that their love for their first child didn't go away when they had a second child, right? And so this is the same idea with our interest for others and our interest for self. Just because we have high interest in one thing doesn't mean we don't have high interest in the other thing. Remember my attitude about my husband's exercise, or my friend that played volleyball, or my ability to give myself to do some time to do something just for myself? I felt it was selfish. But that drive was based on the bias that self-interest and interest in others were dependent on one another. Although exercising did make it so that my husband couldn't sit down at the table a couple times a week, I had to recognize that he sat at a desk for 12 to 15 hours a day studying. He needed that physical activity to give him the energy to continue to do what he was doing to provide for our family. Now, this didn't mean that he cared more about himself than he cared about our family. That was what I had to get over from my personal bias. In fact, when you analyze it from Adam Grant's perspective, it shows that he was acting as an otherish giver. It showed that he wanted to invest in his personal health so he could get that degree and provide for our family. And my friend who has 8 kids, she had to refuel her own interest in order to be able to go home and not throw dishes and yell at everybody. That was her ability to re-energize by giving back to herself. which helped her be a better mother when she did get home. So they were both acting like otherish givers. So if we know that interest in ourselves and interest in others are independent and infinite resources, then it's really about poor time management. Because what are the self-sacrificing givers doing? They're managing their time poorly by giving too much of themselves. And why is that? I think it's because selfless givers truly believe that putting themselves at the top of the priority list is a self-centered thing to do, and that is fueled by our society's way of thinking also. So just think about it. When we talk about serving others, we usually use things like Gandhi's quote here, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. Even something as simple as the motto of Rotary, service above self. Just that saying alone makes you feel like those things are dependent on one another, right? You have to do one higher than the other. And I think this is a step where givers start to fumble, right? Because if we feel like we're not doing enough, sometimes we have this concept of serving even more, right? Especially in volunteer work and education and religion. If you're having trouble, you're just not doing it enough. So you give till it hurts. You're giving your all, and what happens? You're burnt out at the end of the day. You're on 5 committees, your mental and your physical health declines, and you put your small rocks in before your big rocks, and you wonder why you're exhausted at the end of the day. So it's time to understand that the big rocks, what they are, and making sure that we defend them and we put them on the list correctly. So this is the idea of the tagline of the seminar, putting on your oxygen mask first. You've all been on the plane, I'm sure, and they always talk about the cabin pressure and the oxygen mask falling from the top, and they say what? Put on yours first before assisting any children with you. And when we talk about it in this light, we go, well, that makes sense because you obviously can't help anybody if you're passed out in the seat. But when it comes time to look at using that same mentality in our personal lives, that's where we start to fumble. It makes sense with the oxygen mask, but when we sit down and we make our list, where are these important big rocks on our list, right? Where do our needs fit in? We have to mentally accept and give ourselves permission to put ourselves on the to-do list. And that feels selfish. And others might think so too, just like I did with my husband and my friend. But when we arrange our schedule so that our personal gas tank is refilled, it makes our level of giving sustainable. So if we know that we can be more successful by doing this, maybe we'll actually do it. And now that you know that this is the first difference between a selfless giver and an otherish giver, the difference between the top and the corporate ladder, the top and the bottom of the corporate ladder, will you take some time and effort to actually try it out? We'll get to the second way that otherish givers sustain in just a minute, but first I want to think about some successful people. So if you ever read any articles or autobiographies on famous people, such as Bill Gates or Oprah Winfrey, or Richard Branson, you'll see that they have things that they do in their life every day, like exercise or meditation. They read good books. They actually have hobbies. I really, when somebody has asked me the last few years what your hobby is, in my head, I really think making lists. That's what I do every day. When I have free time, that's what I do. I make a list, right? But I know, again, this is where you go, well, if I had their money, if I had their time, I could have hobbies too. But this is what I think we have backwards. I think that these successful people had these habits before they achieved success. These habits are part of what made them successful. It wasn't about money or fame that came later when they had the free time to do these things. They just knew the secret early on. So now what I want to do is I want to share with you a TED Talk that I watched as I was reading the Adam Grant book, and it really brought everything together. So I'm going to exit the screen sharing, and I'm going to go back to our presentation and have this TED Talk. There we go. Okay, so sit back and enjoy this TED Talk.
When people find out I write about time management, they assume 2 things. One is that I'm always on time, and I'm not. I have 4 small children, and I would like to blame them for my occasional tardiness, but sometimes it's just not their fault. I was once late to my own speech on time management. We all had to just take a moment together and savor that irony. The second thing they assume is that I have lots of tips and tricks for saving bits of time here and there. And sometimes I'll hear from magazines that are doing a story along these lines, generally on how to help their readers find an extra hour in the day. And the idea is that we'll shave bits of time off everyday activities, add it up, and we'll have time for the good stuff. And I question the entire premise of this piece. But I'm always interested in hearing what they've come up with before they call me. So some of my favorites: doing errands in a way where you only have to make right-hand turns, being extremely judicious in microwave usage, so it says 3 to 3.5 minutes on the package. We are totally getting in on the bottom side of that. And my personal favorite, which makes sense on some level, is to DVR your favorite shows so you can fast forward through the commercials. And that way you save about 8 minutes every half hour. So in the course of 2 hours of watching TV, you find 32 minutes to exercise. Which is true. You know another way to find 32 minutes to exercise? Don't watch 2 hours of TV a day, right? Anyway, the idea is we'll save bits of time here and there, add it up, we will finally get to everything we want to do. But after studying how successful people spend their time and looking at their schedules hour by hour, I think this idea has it completely backward. We don't build the lives we want by saving time. We build the lives we want, and then time saves itself. Here's what I mean. I recently did a time diary project looking at 1,001 days in the lives of extremely busy women. They had demanding jobs, sometimes their own businesses, kids to care for, maybe parents to care for, community commitments. Busy, busy people. I had them keep track of their time for a week so I could add up how much they worked and slept, and I interviewed them about their strategies for my book. One of the women whose time log I studied, she goes out for a Wednesday night for something. She comes home to find that her water heater has broken, and there is now water all over her basement. If you've ever had anything like this happen to you, you know it is a hugely damaging, frightening, sopping mess. So she's dealing with the immediate aftermath that night. Next day, she's got plumbers coming in. Day after that, professional cleaning crew dealing with the ruined carpet. All this is being recorded on her time log. Winds up taking 7 hours of her week. 7 hours. That's like finding an extra hour in the day. But I'm sure if you had asked her at the start of the week, could you find 7 hours to train for a triathlon? Could you find 7 hours to mentor 7 worthy people? I'm sure she would have said what most of us would have said, which is no. Can't you see how busy I am? Yet when she had to find 7 hours because there is water all over her basement, she found 7 hours. And what this shows us is that time is highly elastic. We cannot make more time, but time will stretch to accommodate what we choose to put into it. And so the key to time management is treating our priorities as the equivalent of that broken water heater. And to get at this, I like to use some language from one of the busiest people I ever interviewed. By busy, I mean she was running a small business with 12 people on the payroll. She had 6 children in her spare time. I was getting in touch with her to set up an interview on how she had it all, that phrase. I remember it was a Thursday morning, and she was not available to speak with me, of course, right? But the reason she was unavailable to speak with me is that she was out for a hike, because it was a beautiful spring morning, and she wanted to go for a hike. So, of course, this makes me even more intrigued, and when I finally do catch up with her, she explains it like this. She says, "Listen, Laura, everything I do, every minute I spend is my choice. And rather than say, I don't have time to do X, Y, or Z, she'd say, I don't do X, Y, or Z because it's not a priority. I don't have time often means it's not a priority." If you think about it, that's really more accurate language. I mean, I could tell you I don't have time to dust my blinds, but that's not true. If you offered to pay me $100,000 to go dust my blinds, I would get to it pretty quickly. Since that is not going to happen, I can acknowledge this is not a matter of lacking time. It's that I don't want to do it. Using this language reminds us that time is a choice. And granted, there may be horrible consequences for making different choices. I will give you that. But we are smart people, and certainly over the long run, we have the power to fill our lives with the things that deserve to be there. So how do we do that? How do we treat our priorities as the equivalent of that broken water heater? Well, first we need to figure out what they are. And I want to give you 2 strategies for thinking about this. The first, on the professional side. I'm sure many people coming up to the end of the year are giving or getting annual performance reviews. You look back over your successes over the year, your opportunities for growth. And this serves its purpose, but I find it's more effective to do this looking forward. So I want you to pretend it's the end of next year. You're giving yourself a performance review, and it has been an absolutely amazing year for you professionally. What 3 to 5 things did you do that made it so amazing? So you can write next year's performance review now. And you can do this for your personal life, too. I'm sure many of you, like me, come December, get cards that contain these folded up sheets of colored paper, on which is written what is known as the family holiday letter. Bit of a wretched genre of literature, really, going on about how amazing everyone in the household is, or even more scintillating, how busy everyone in the household is. But these letters serve a purpose, which is that they tell your friends and family what you did in your personal life that mattered to you over the course of the year. So this year's kind of done, but I want you to pretend it's the end of next year. And it has been an absolutely amazing year for you and the people you care about. What 3 to 5 things did you do that made it so amazing? So you can write next year's family holiday letter now. Don't send it. Please, don't send it. But you can write it. And now between the performance review and the family holiday letter, we have a list of 6 to 10 goals we can work on in the next year. And now we need to break these down into doable steps. So maybe you want to write a family history. Well, first you can read some other family histories, get a sense for the style. And then maybe think about the questions you want to ask your relatives, set up appointments to interview them. Or maybe you want to run a 5K. So you need to find a race and sign up and figure out a training plan and dig those shoes out of the back of the closet. And then, this is key, we treat our priorities as the equivalent of that broken water heater by putting them into our schedules first. And we do this by thinking through our weeks before we are in them. I find a really good time to do this is Friday afternoons. Friday afternoon is what an economist might call a low opportunity cost time. Most of us are not sitting there on Friday afternoon saying, I am excited to make progress toward my personal and professional priorities right now. But we are willing to think about what those should be. So take a little bit of time Friday afternoon, make yourself a 3-category priority list: career, relationships, self. Making a 3-category list reminds us that there should be something in all 3 categories. Career we think about, relationships, self, not so much. But anyway, just a short list, 2 to 3 items in each. Then look out over the whole of the next week and see where you can plan them in. Where you plan them in is up to you. And I know this is going to be more complicated for some people than others. I mean, some people's lives are just harder than others. It is not going to be easy to find time to take that poetry class if you are caring for multiple children on your own. I get that. And I don't want to minimize anyone's struggle. But I do think that the numbers I am about to tell you are empowering. There are 168 hours in a week. 24 times 7 is 168 hours. That is a lot of time. If you are working a full-time job, so 40 hours a week, sleeping 8 hours a night, so 56 hours a week, that leaves 72 hours for other things. That is a lot of time. You say you're working 50 hours a week, maybe a main job and a side hustle. Well, that leaves 62 hours for other things. You say you're working 60 hours. Well, that leaves 52 hours for other things. You say you're working more than 60 hours. Well, are you sure? There was once a study comparing people's estimated work weeks with time diaries, found that people claiming 75-plus hour work weeks were off by about 25 hours. You can guess in which direction, right? Anyway, in 168 hours a week, I think we can find time for what matters to you. If you want to spend more time with your kids, you want to study more for a test you're taking, you want to exercise for 3 hours and volunteer for 2, you can. And that's even if you're working way more than full-time hours. So we have plenty of time, which is great, because guess what? We don't even need that much time to do amazing things. But when most of us have bits of time, what do? Pull out the phone, right? Start deleting emails, or otherwise we're puttering around the house or watching TV. But small moments can have great power. You can use your bits of time for bits of joy. Maybe it's choosing to read something wonderful on the bus on the way to work. I know when I had a job that required 2 bus rides and a subway ride every morning, I used to go to the library on weekends to get stuff to read. Made the whole experience almost enjoyable. Breaks at work can be used for meditating or praying. If family dinner is out because of your crazy work schedule, maybe family breakfast could be a good substitute. It's about looking at the whole of one's time and seeing where the good stuff can go. I truly believe this. There is time. Even if we are busy, we have time for what matters. And when we focus on what matters, we can build the lives we want in the time we've got. Thank you.
Okay, so what did you think of that video? I hope you can see how it tied in exactly to what Adam Grant was talking about. And I think that the idea of reminding yourself that you should be on the list is just so important. Now, let me give you an example. I kid you not, I think it was a joke from above, but right after I got done teaching this to a group of women that I do some seminars with, I came home, and it was one of those days where every minute was scheduled, right? I had set aside 1 hour that afternoon, which was the only hour I had, to finish preparing for a Cub Scout pack meeting for about 40 people that night. But when I got home and I pulled into the garage, I found that one of my children had left my freezer door open, and half of the food was thawing. There was just frost everywhere. The roads rolls were rising, and I had to act. I did not have time to mess with it, but I can testify to you that what Laura said was right. I made time because I did not want to lose all of the food, all of the meat that we had in this deep freezer. So I made time, hurriedly, of course, to get things into a place where they would be okay. And I still got to my Cub Scout pack meeting, and somehow it all got done because I just needed to deal with that priority. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, to help you remember what she said, I have made a worksheet that can kind of help walk you through the way that you spend your time and focus on that job review and the Christmas letter that she referred to. So if you haven't had access to that yet, just send me an email at the end of the webinar, and I will be happy to email that to you. So now we've talked about different personalities, we've talked about how they fit into an organization and why some succeed and others fail. And we've talked about the first part of how this information can change the way you manage your time by putting your personal needs on your to-do list. So let's talk about the second thing now, and that is recognizing why you give. So what is it that motivates you, and being able to refuel that why through service, which kind of sounds funny because we just talked about making sure that you have enough interest in yourself as others, but I really feel like this is the key to avoiding burnout. And that's what we're going to cover now. And this is also going to help us with that fifth point that I talked about how to make you a better leader and a better boss. So given the target market of the local first clientele, I'm going to guess that a lot of you wear many hats in your community. And I'm going to take that a step further, and I'm going to guess that if you were to take that Adam Grant personality test, the majority of you will have a dominant giver personality. If not, you probably work in an organization where there are a lot of givers in the community, right? So I'm speaking to you now And I want to talk to you about being part of the same 10 people. That makes up all those numerous committees and organizations. You get tired and you wonder when somebody else is going to step up. At some point, you had decided it was important enough to be part of that, but now you're feeling burnout, right? And this is the time management that we're going to explore now. And it's very serious business. So we're actually going to start by sharing another video real quick here. All right, so now we're going to play this.
Now this is a story all about how my life got flipped, turned upside down, and I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. I'll tell you how I became the prince of a town called Bel Air. In West Philadelphia, born and raised, on the playground is where I spent most of my days. Chilling out, maxing, relaxing, all cool and all, shooting some b-ball outside of the school. When a couple of guys who were up to no good started making trouble in my neighborhood. I got in one little fight and my mom got scared and said, "You're moving with your auntie and uncle in Bel Air."
So I know you're all singing that song now, right? By the way, I just heard on Twitter last week that they might actually be bringing the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air back. So, so that's interesting if that got you excited for the Fresh Prince. But the reason I'm playing that for you is because Will Smith actually did grow up in West Philadelphia, and he actually went to a high school called Overbrook High School. It holds such a special place in his heart now that if you ever watch one of his movies that he produced, you'll see that Overbrook is actually the name of his production company. Now, the fact is, though, that even though a couple of great, amazing, notable people have come from this high school, for most kids, it's not a fairy tale at all. It's just a few blocks from one of the top 10 drug corners in the United States. In 2006, it was one of 28 schools listed as persistently dangerous, and the graduation rate is only 54%. So for years, there's an organization called Teach for America that sends teachers here. It's a national program, and they've sent over 20,000 teachers the past 22 years to different schools, usually in high-risk areas. So they take these graduates that are all ramped up and excited to teach. They're ready to go change the world, and they drop them into these high-risk schools to try to generate some kind of interest by the students, to generate something that has been missing from the school. So one of those people from the TFA, her name is Conray Callahan, and Anna Grant shares her story in the book. Now, she was 24 years old, and in a high school of 97% African Americans, she really stood out. She grew up in the Maryland suburbs, and she was the captain for her high school soccer and lacrosse team. She competed for 6 years as a jump rope competitions and actually made the Junior Olympics. Now, her Vanderbilt professors encouraged her to pursue history, but she wanted to go into education. Now, this was her why. This is why she wanted to go into education. She said, "I set out to make a difference, improving education and opportunities for kids in low-income communities." So this is what drove her, okay? So she was a giver. She tested as a giver on Adam Grant's test. But what happened is, of course, when she was put in that atmosphere, her idealistic dreams were quickly crushed as she found herself getting to school at 6:45 and then staying up till 1 a.m., grading papers and doing lesson planning. She was breaking up fights and battling crime. She was tracking down truant students, and her most promising student was in foster care and had to drop out after giving birth to a child with developmental problems. So it wasn't long before Conray, as a giver, hit rock bottom. She was burning out. And some of you have probably experienced a similar situation with your job or your community work. You're trying to make a difference. You had such good intention, but the process beat you down and you thought, let's just forget it, right? A Berkeley psychologist stated that teachers have one of the highest rates of professional burnout. She states that TFA focuses on hard work and dedication almost to a fault. You leave the training with a mindset that unless you pour every waking hour of your life into your job, then you are doing a disservice to your kids. More than half of the TFA teachers leave after their 2-year contract is up. More than 80% are gone after 3 years, and about 1/3 of all TFA teachers walk away from education altogether. This is an example of the mentality that I referred to earlier. Society often pushes certain professions to give till it hurts. Because it's a service-based job, there's this underlying expectation that everything in your life should center around your job. So what did Conray do? Now, the natural idea would be to take a break, recover, recharge by reducing her giving, but she put herself, and putting herself first would be something that first step implied when we talk about the difference between selfish givers or selfless givers and otherish givers, right? But instead of doing that, she gave more. Now, this is where we see that successful givers are constantly refueling their why, or in other words, they know what motivates them, and they continue to find a way to stimulate that. And that brings us to a really important question. Why do givers give? A giver gives to make a difference, right? We talked about that earlier. Givers want to make a difference. Now, how do they know that they've made a difference? They need to see their impact. Again, this is where our culture tries to tell us that we're wrong or we're selfish. We say, do a good deed with no expectation of something in return. But don't get this mixed up with award or reward. This is simply acknowledgement from the receiver that what you did made a positive difference for them. If we know that a person's reason for helping is to make a difference, and then we starve them of knowing if they've made a difference, how long will they continue to give? So here's a little visual example, the cycle of action for givers. So a giver will see an opportunity to help, and then they perform the giving action, and then the recipient benefits, right? But here's the key, right? The giver needs to see the impact because that's what motivates them. So that's where the magic happens. That's where the refueling spot is. And where we usually fail is after the recipient benefits. Because once the recipient benefits, if they don't turn around and somehow acknowledge that, then the thing that is motivating the giver is never received, and they're going to be less likely to want to give again. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine had told me she had signed up to bring dinner to a family who recently had a new baby, but she forgot. And so I think it was about an hour and a half before she was supposed to have the dinner there, her calendar reminder went off, and she realized, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to make dinner for 6 people and deliver it in an hour and a half. So she ran around her kitchen, finding things, throwing this meal together last minute. It was really high stress because she didn't have the time set aside to do it, although she wanted to do it. But she finally got it to the house. She hands it off to the family, and they're smiling and they're grateful, and she's feeling pretty good about it, right? Because she was doing it to help, because she was a giver. But as she was driving away, the pizza delivery man pulled into the driveway and was headed up to the front door of the same house. So how did that make her feel? She made that meal because she thought, tonight this family will be able to, relax and enjoy and recover from the woman having the baby and enjoy this homemade meal. So she felt like she was making a difference for them. But as soon as that pizza delivery man pulled up, she realized that what she had done for them really didn't make a difference because they would have had pizza either way. So the next time somebody needs help with a meal, she's going to remember this experience and go, I don't know if it was worth it, right? So that's just an example. So when we think about Conray and the reason that she wants to give, let's think back at what she said her why was. I set out to make a difference, improving education and opportunities for kids in low-income communities, right? So what she started to do is she started to do one-on-one private tutoring. So she spent her nights and weekends filing for a nonprofit status to become a certified chapter for Minds Matter, which is a nationwide tutoring program. She devoted 5 hours a week mentoring high school students one-on-one, and she also became a mentor for other TFA teachers, all in all spending about 10 hours a week giving in addition to her job. But what happened? Her burnout faded and her energy returned because she was seeing her impact. With that one-on-one tutoring, she was making a difference in students' lives, and she started to fulfill her why. And of the 12 teachers that arrived at Overbrook during the last 3 years that she was there, she was just one of 2 that ended up staying. So after you absorb how you can personally use this information to help yourself by examining what motivates you, let's think about how you can use it to motivate others around you and help them succeed in the workplace and in the community and different organizations and volunteer groups, right? So here's an example. So Adam Grant was asked to come and do some analysis at a call center at a university. The university call center is where the students were hired, and they called alumni for donations to put towards student scholarships. They were required to ask for donations 3 times before hanging up, and they had a rejection rate of 90%, so it's a tough job, definitely. Adam knew the takers would drop like flies because they didn't have anything to gain, right? But he expected that the givers would excel because they were helping other students succeed through providing those scholarships. So everybody took the test, and he measured everyone's personality, a giver, a matcher, or a taker. And he found that the takers were bringing in an average of 30 donations a week, but surprisingly, the givers, they were only bringing in 10 donations a week. He was mystified until he saw a sign posted by an employee at his computer. This was the sign. Doing a good job here is like wetting your pants in a dark suit. You get a warm feeling, but no one else notices. Now, according to his data, this employee was a giver. So why would he feel so unappreciated? Now, he realized that givers were being deprived of the rewards that they found most energizing, right? So the takers were motivated because they were actually working in a job that was the highest paying job on campus. So they were doing it for themselves. But the givers, they wanted their work to benefit others. But even though they were collecting the money, they had no way to know exactly how what they were doing was benefiting anyone. So what Adam did is he brought in letters from students whose scholarship had been funded by the caller's work. After reading the letters, it took the givers just 1 week to catch up with the takers, and the takers even showed a small improvement too, but the givers tripled their calls and donations. So Adam took it 1 step further, and he brought in a few scholarship recipients. Callers went to averaging $412 a week to $2,000 a week in donations. Overall, just 5 minutes of interacting with one scholarship winner motivated 23 callers to raise an additional $38,000 for the university in a single week. There were several control groups, by the way, that were in place, and none of them showed change at all. Only those where the givers interacted with the recipients of the scholarships. So when you think about your own organization, how can you implement this? Who are your givers, and what is their why? And how can you help them see their impact? Giving awards or hosting a recognition dinner, giving gift cards and anniversary plaques, those things are nice. But no one sticks with a job or volunteers their time because they want a trophy or a free frappuccino from Starbucks. We have to think about what really motivates them and have that source be the direct connection to the employee or to our volunteer to show the difference. They also showed where they would do a summary of the impact through the supervisor. So the supervisor could get up there and say, hey, this person benefited, or this much money was raised, but it didn't have the same impact as hearing it direct from the source. So applying this within your organization, the first thing you have to do is you have to recognize who your takers are. Throughout the studies that they have done, they have found just how corrosive a taker is, because what happens is if your givers are acting like self-sacrificing givers, that taker takes advantage of them, and then they're pretty much done. And then the matchers do the same thing. Matchers will recognize a taker and pull back. And so a taker can have just detrimental impact on an organization. So the first thing to do is to get the wrong people off the bus, right? Then after you do that, if you identify your givers and figure out their motivation, their why. Now there's also a great TED Talk by Simon Sinek on why. If you want to look that up, it can go a little bit more into the psychology of what motivates us. But if you help them see their impact, preferably again from the direct source, then make that cycle a consistent process, then you can also pair your matchers through mentorships with the givers. That will help develop a culture of trust, and then your matchers will actually start acting like givers. So always remember the need also for your givers to have that balance in their life, to make sure that you're not overworking them, that they have the ability to work on their personal health and have the support for their hobbies and interests. So this is what we discussed today. We talked about the different personalities, how they fit within the organization, and why some succeed and others fail, and how this information can change the way you manage your time and make you a better leader, a boss, or a parent, or spouse. My goal was just to teach you something new about managing your priorities. I really hope that you take the information from this webinar. Just give yourself 30 minutes in the next week or two to figure out how you can implement it in your life. And then if you're able to do that successfully, you'll be able to help others too. And I hope that you're able to take at least one of these ideas to just make yourself happier. Whether it's taking 15 minutes in the morning to meditate or to do some yoga so that you can be better energized for your day because you took that time, or whether you do it through service and you figure out where can I give more so that I can get motivated for the things I really want to contribute to this world. I'll leave you with this quote. One of the greatest challenges of this life is the ordering of priorities. If we do not do this wisely, then the things that matter the most in life are at the mercy of the things that matter the least. So I thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm glad that you took the time to watch this webinar. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or give me a call, the contact information that you see on this screen. Also, if you are interested in any small business help, you can find your local Small Business Development Center by going to www.AZRDC.net here in the state of Arizona. I'm going to turn this time back over to Maya now and stop sharing my screen.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Charmaine. That was a wealth of information. As you all can see, we have what's coming up next from Local First Arizona Foundation here on the screen. We have our 2 webinars listed up here. You can find them both at www.localfirstazfoundation.org. And if you want to sign up to be a part of any of our regionally specific newsletters or our rural development newsletter, you can reach out to me. My contact information is right here. For anyone who listened into this that also was a part of the live recording, and you want some of the questions you had asked re-answered, you can reach out to Charmaine or myself and we can figure out what those questions were and get them answered again. But as Charmaine mentioned, feel free to reach out to her, and I am always available to you as well. So thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next month for our next webinar. Have a great rest of your day.